So, loneliness is actually a gift. Okay? Most people, right, are surrounded by noise, right? Big family, big company, you know, all these big social conventions that you're constantly surrounded in. When do you get the chance to actually go within yourself and discover your true nature? If you're constantly flooded with noise, gossip, opinions, expectations, all these different societal educational programmings, right? Like going to school, you gotta listen to the teacher constantly, you gotta constantly receive what is impure to your nature, right? If you don't experience deep loneliness, silence, okay? The ability to actually carve your own inner receptivity and your own inner spirit, your own inner clarity. Then, ultimately, you lose the connection, right? If you constantly invest your time in socializing, in pleasing other people, in receiving comfort and pleasure from, I don't know, your girlfriend or your boyfriend, or from all these social conventions that you go to that sound and feel so nice, then, in my opinion, 9 times out of 10, you get weaker. You know what I mean? Like, if you want to be strong, if you want to be resilient, if you want to be in tune with the deepest parts of your consciousness and the deepest parts of nature, you gotta really cultivate your consciousness in solitude. Okay? Because solitude teaches you receptivity. It teaches you how to truly listen. It teaches you also how to make decisions and form perceptions based in your deepest being, right? Because, you see, most people live in the shadows of other people's opinions, of other people's expectations, right? All of these different safety nets that literally strangle the true spirit out of you until when you are alone, you feel isolated, you feel disconnected. And that's not because you're physically alone. That's because you never trained your spirit to understand the oneness, right? The quantum field. What Maharishi Mahesh Yogi described as Prajñā, right? Prajñā paramita. It means, it represents emptiness that is beyond, and that is the ultimate truth, right? Ultimate realization, right? And you can't experience Prajñā, the perfected wisdom, without being alone. if you spend many years alone and many years meditating and concentrating upon emptiness and upon the field, ultimately what happens is everything becomes familiar. Okay? People, animals, mountains, trees, everything becomes relative. Okay? Everything becomes a reflection. No longer an identity outside of you. You get what I'm saying? Most people feel alone because they crave comfort. They crave pleasure. But all pleasure is actually, most of the time, actually just an illusion, okay? Because the ultimate sensory perception, the ultimate sense is a fullness of being that doesn't require other people, doesn't require people telling you things or people being around you. Though it might seem like that, it's just an illusion, you know? And breaking that mental illusion is like, that's the real game, right? That's the real game. That's what a lot of people struggle with. Because we're all in these bodies, right? And we're surrounded by all these different sounds and, you know, responsibilities that we have agreed to fulfill on a constant basis, right? Going to work, paying all these different like debts, all these different things that we have to manage distract us from that deep core of our being, right? That deep core of our being is Prajñā. It's pure emptiness, but it's also the perfected wisdom that exists beyond, right? And if you surround yourself with people and you feel alone, that means that there's some quality in like the spirit of the people around you. Like they're, you know, they're not attuned to that deeper wisdom. If you actually surround yourself with people who are attuned to that deeper wisdom, then you feel something deeper and something more expansive and something that fills you that you can't really describe, right? That's the reason why, like, in different social settings, different environments that people find themselves, like, you can still feel alone, right? You know, Japan is one of these countries where it's very easy to feel the notion of loneliness because everyone is busy. People are quite inclusive into different groups, different, you know, clubs, different settings, different things. Isolation is a real thing. And there are different qualities of isolation, okay? The most dangerous kind of isolation is being isolated in an environment that doesn't feed your spirit. It's different than being isolated in nature surrounded by beautiful mountains and trees, animals, and water, where if you actually isolate yourself in that environment, you experience something profound, something deep, something beyond words, right? You start to experience that many rishis or yogis or sages, or like legendary people throughout history have all reported, right? These great volumes of energy from nature which fills them, makes them feel whole, makes them feel one, right? Makes them feel clarified and purified, right? But if you're isolated in your room, in the city, or if you're isolated in like different toxic environments or like toxic workspace, that's a real problem. And you gotta find every single way to get out of it. And trust me, I've been there, okay? I've had a lot of bad jobs. I've been in a lot of fairly negative experiences or environments. It just feels like you're being strangulated, you know what I mean? Like, that type of isolation subjects you to a dangerous kind of loneliness, because you're not being surrounded with that dynamic natural energy, right? That would otherwise improve your quality of life, right? And like purify your perception, you know what I mean? And make you feel lighter and happier, right? It's this whole notion of like hikikomori, right? Where like people, they literally like shut themselves in, they lock themselves in, and like they just game all day, or they read comic books, or they're afraid to interact with the outer world because they have become so familiar and so comfortable in this artificial kind of environment. That is also dangerous. And the reason why it's dangerous is because that type of environment eventually makes you weak. It takes away from your energy. Because naturally, as humans, right, like we're supposed to be out there, right? We're supposed to be out in nature, we're supposed to be social creatures, we're supposed to be with other people. But that cycle of like shutting yourself off from the outer world happens far too often all around the world. Not just in Japan, all around the world. Every country has its shut-ins, right? People like that, they just need an environment to develop their real strengths, their real consciousness. And it's not necessarily easy, but to move outside of isolation and to go out into the world and experience the raw nature of things and the raw reality of things, it takes a decision. It's like the courage of the heart, courage of the spirit, right? The only way to truly develop that is to make the decision. Either you decide to be isolated, or you decide to take the risk and potentially out in the world doing what you love, or doing what you want, or doing, like discovering new things, or traveling and like exploring the mountains where like wild bears exist and like wild creatures exist, and like there's all kinds of things that could possibly happen in those types of environments. Nature wakes up the body, it wakes up the biology, it brings out the testosterone, it brings out the man or woman within you. Because as humans, we're supposed to be stimulated, the dynamic forces of nature, right? We're supposed to be stimulated by the heat of the sun, the deep cold of the winter. You know, like the constant need to survive and take care of ourselves and each other, that constant friction and that constant kind of necessary sense, you know? That's what we're supposed to feel and experience, you know? But if we become too comfortable, if we become too accustomed to like feeling good all the time and being entertained and flooding ourselves with senses and like delicious food and like convenience, okay? Convenience fuels weakness, okay? And if you want to really become one, if you really want friends, if you want nature to be on your side, you gotta feel it. You gotta be out there. You gotta get hungry. You gotta actually search and find the things and whatever equipment or resources or knowledge that you need. Yeah, you know, we live in this world of like just ongoing convenience and ongoing you know, pleasure and beauty and just everything that, you know, all the luxury and all of the, you know, fantasies, right, we buy into and that we constantly feed from, right? And we think that's what we need, that's what we think that we want. The more of it that we have sometimes takes away from what we truly are. Loneliness is a gift. Nature teaches you. The wind speaks to you. The earth, you start to feel it. You feel the rhythms, you feel everything. But yeah, if you isolate yourself in a toxic environment, it might take a real toll on your life. And that's what you got to watch out for. You know what I mean?